Hello everyone, Ruby Ravel here, a nautical navigator of never-ending near misses and phantasmagorical yearnings, here to talk to you today about Venus, Trine, Neptune. Now, these two planets are generally considered to have a certain sympathy with one another because Neptune is considered to be the higher octave of Venus. Both of them are connected in some way with our relationships to the other. In Venus's case, it's our relationship to a partner or to someone that we're close or intimate with. But Neptune is about our relationship with a much more ineffable thing, our connection to the divine, to the source, to the numinous, to the ecstatic, to the euphoric, to anything that has the potentiality to take us away from the lonely limitations of Saturnian defined selfhood and to propel us into the archic realm of the archetypal realm of infinite oneness with the source. It wants a love or a connection that is not human but transhuman, which transcends humanity and injects it with a bit of magic, with godliness, on both a euphoric and a tragic level. And on a mythological level, even though we name Neptune after the Roman god of the sea, most commentators really feel that he would be better described by Dionysus or Bacchus, who was the mad god of intoxication, of divine madness, of revelation, the god who, when you are under his spell, was like taking some kind of elixir that lifted you out of your well-defined ego and propelled you into this realm of illogic and unreason in which you could cavort with impossible colors, in which you were no longer bound by selfish notions of survival and preservation, but were willing to sacrifice everything that you valued, everything that you loved, everything that you were, in order to surrender yourself to the ecstasy of merging with the Godhead, of merging with Dionysus, of drinking the opiate wine that ran through his phantasmagorical veins. And understanding the character of Dionysus can tell us a bit about how Venus Trine Neptune can manifest itself, and also the coloration that it gives to our romantic values, particularly the yearning for romance as a vital element of any relationship is very heightened, because Venus usually just governs the lower, more personal, more individual, more selfish reasons that we enter into a relationship. Venus is contractual. She gives and she expects to receive. She says, I will offer you these wonderful qualities and polarities that I have, and in return, I expect you to give me these. But that kind of contractuality doesn't work for Neptune. Neptune doesn't want to be governed by those selfish motives. It wants to rise above them. It wants something that will take it away from the pain of being a separate entity and will give it some kind of feeling of having a greater interconnectivity, where the boundaries between self and other begin to blur, where life doesn't feel like this tight, claustrophobic clown suit of consciousness, which is what David Lynch calls it, but instead feels more immersive, more floaty, more dreamy, more nebulous, more ambiguous, like you've just dived into an impressionistic painting where you can allow yourself to gestate in all of these soft-toned, wishy-washy, amberous colors. So if we go through the first four signs of Venus in the zodiac, Venus in Aries, wants a sparring partner. It wants someone it can wrestle with, someone who can be a playmate that it can compete with. Taurus wants someone that it can eat and make love with, who satisfies its senses, but who is also solid and reliable and not likely to suddenly run away and change. It's a nice grazing patch that it doesn't want to go away. Venus in Gemini is a sapiosexual. It wants someone who can turn on its mind, who can be a verbal sparring partner, who can be someone that it can endlessly debate and exchange ideas with, so it keeps the buzzing hummingbird heartbeat of reality throbbing with a quickened and stimulating pulse. Venus in Cancer, which is the transit we're actually talking about, wants emotional security and safety in a relationship. It wants a partner who is like a mummy and daddy, or who it can be a mummy and daddy too. And if it has a partner that it can entrust its feelings with, like a parent, that means it gets to be a child. It can switch off. It can have someone it can truly rest and relax and be unself-conscious with. Vice versa, if it has a partner who is needy and a bit infantile and a bit of a child, then it can feel maternal or paternal towards them. It can be the caretaker, and it can easily flip these roles in the right situation. We typically associate Venus in Cancer with valuing more traditional relationship tropes of wanting to be a traditional husband or wife who has 2-point kids and has a nice home with the picket fence. And so long as that is all in place and doesn't look like it's suddenly going to explode or run away in the night, then Venus in Cancer is capable of feeling quite strong and sure of herself. If she doesn't have that, she's likely to feel very insecure and unsure of herself. But when Neptune comes along, maybe this ordinary domestic fantasy seems too mundane. It seems too ordinary. It seems too governed by simple human motives of propagating the species and looking after one's own senses and survivals. Neptune doesn't think about the emotions of the individual. It thinks about the greater yearnings and longings and fantasies and need for deeper fulfillment of the collective as an entirety. And therefore it's not content just to give its love to an individual. It needs to be giving its love to a dream. So let's say Venus in Cancer is at home, and the kids are running around squalling and screaming and chasing after each other and making a lot of noise, and daddy's on the sofa watching football and not being terribly engaging. And normally these things are fine. Normally Venus in Cancer loves these things. They feel comforting, they feel secure, they feel reliable, they feel stable. And yet today, with Neptune on the horizon, it doesn't feel quite enough. It feels like there has to be something more. That this all feels too low and too base and too squalid and too separate, that there is a deeper emotional longing that one feels deprived of. There is a greater spiritual coloration to life that is denied. There is a lack of enchantment. Everything seems too mundane and humdrum and everyday. It's lacking that romantic sparkle that can elevate even the most ordinary of things into a technicolor daydream. And Venus in Cancer starts longing there and thinking, well, what would a perfect relationship be? What could fulfill this deep emotional and spiritual lack that I feel in my soul? And she starts looking misty-eyed out the window. And when she's looking out in the garden, suddenly she observes that there is this ancient stone well that she's never seen before. She thinks, where does this come from? And where does it go? It looks like it must go deep underground to some sacred source. Perhaps it is the residing place of some magical nymph. So seeing that the kids are safe with her rather dull husband, she tiptoes out into the garden and slowly approaches this well. And as she approaches it, this kind of almost strangely delirious seasickness of the self takes over. Everything around her suddenly becomes a bit wavy, a bit fluid. When she looks down at the grass, it is no longer normal everyday grass, but there are fairies riding on dragonflies and riding on the backs of bumblebees and ladybirds. There's a whole elemental other world going on around this garden that she takes for granted. Suddenly, the singing of the birds in her garden that are just such a normal soundtrack to her life that she shuts off from them instead become this magical polyphony, this symphonic sound world from another realm. And it seems to put her in this hypnotic space where she starts to forget herself. She forgets her name. She forgets that she's even just left the house. She forgets who her husband is. All that matters right now is coming as close to this magic and enchantment that is gradually ensorceling her and creeping into her cells and making everything that she's experienced beforehand seem unimportant and trivial and dull and also rather tragic in its lack of depth or meaning. And as she approaches this well now, which has suddenly grown much bigger in the interlude, this magical green figure from another realm rises up. And he is so beautiful, it is almost terrifying. When you look into his eyes, you do not feel that you are just seeing normal pupils and irises. You feel like you are seeing 10 million suns transferring their light from a universe which you never knew existed, but which in some strange, crazy, prophetic way to you feels like a home, feels like a place you once were, where you were infinitely happy, which you can sometimes feel nagging, whispering to you at the edges and corners of your dreams, but which during waking moments of work and routine is forgotten. But here it is again in glory. And those eyes are so beautiful and tempting and luscious that you just want to dive into them, that you want all of your cells to be obliterated in the sunlight of this sacred soul who has suddenly appeared to you in your garden. And as you get closer, he starts to speak, and his words are not human words. They are strange sibilants speaking from a mouth that is somehow far away and yet also a whisper directly inside your head, and which can set choirs going inside the chambers of your heart. And she is pulled along by this enchantment, and she's right there against the stone barrier of the well. And then suddenly she starts to come to herself, and she realizes what she's doing. And she thinks, well, if I carry on like this, then I might just fall into that well, and I don't know what's down there. I don't know how deep the fall is. I might drown, or I might just hit a rock hard bottom. What am I doing? So she tries to negotiate with Neptune, and she says, well, I really want you. You're really something spectacular, but maybe you should step out of the well. Maybe you should come towards me and envelop me. And Neptune says, no. You have to forget everything that you've known before. You have to forget about your children and your husband. The only thing you should do right now is just chase this feeling, because everything else is but a pale, paltry shadow in comparison to this. And all of the magic that she was experiencing before amplifies itself to the point where she loses all reason, and she just dives into this well and disappears. So you could say that what Venus Trine Neptune wants is not an ordinary partner who it eats with, sleeps with, buys a house and has a mortgage and 3 kids with. It wants a soul partner. It wants a soulmate, someone who on a deep spiritual level feels just like they resonate with them, that they complete them, that they take all of the little gaps and nooks and crannies and areas of deficiency, and their waters just wash over you. And suddenly everything feels whole and complete and magical again. And we feel so much more than ourselves. But because Venus trine Neptune has these incredible mystical longings that it anticipates from partnerships, it is also very prone to disappointment. Because really, if you want a partner who is just there to just meet your basic needs, then you probably don't have to look very far. If you just need someone to do those things with, then you can pick out anyone like that, because, you know, most of those basic needs are pretty interchangeable and don't really require that much individuality or elevation from a person. But if what you are looking for is not an ordinary mammalian human being, but someone who is an ambassador from the source, who is a god or a goddess, who you do expect to fulfill you completely in every possible way, then that's going to be much harder to find. And yet, with that Venus-Neptunian trigger, because the desire for that all-encompassing, all-consuming romance is so strong, Venus trine Neptune is often very happy to project all of those magical qualities on someone, even if they don't possess them. You know, it might have this idealized vision of a partner that it has in its head, you know, maybe due to its appearance or certain qualities it has, or, you know, you name it. And sometimes with Venus trine Neptune, it can be just like, if someone just has, you know, a tiny little bit of that, then we're willing to edit in the rest in our imagination. We're willing to add in the Technicolor, to take it to the studio and put the right edits and filters on it that make it look better than it is, so that we feel that the thing that we've been crying out for is finally ahead of us. Whereas the reason Venus trine Neptune or Venus-Neptune experiences disappointments in any partnership is because eventually, after a certain amount of time, there may be some cognitive dissonance between the fantasy that they've projected on a partner and the reality of that, who that individual is. That may be very different from what they expected or hoped they would be. But the yearning for this kind of otherworldly love is so strong that if Venus trine Neptune thinks it has found it in someone else, then it is often very capable of losing its head completely. If it thinks it's found its soulmate, if it thinks it's found its one, if it thinks that it's found the twin flame who it once burned with before it incarnated in this tawdry, earthy world, then it will say, finally, it's here, the intoxication, the euphoria, the secret color that I've always known existed but never found before. It's here. And therefore it will throw all caution to the wind, and like someone diving into a deep sea, which it doesn't know the true breadth and depth of, will just throw itself in and say, I don't care what happens now, this is worth every possible risk, failure, or suffering for. You know, there's a chance that this will all fuck up, but right now I am willing to risk everything if it gets me closer to that heaven, to that secret paradise in my heart that I know is truly possible. And if Venus-Neptune feels like it has found that partner, then it feels like there is nothing else in its life that it would not be willing to forsake to keep this person, this ambassador from the source in its life. It is willing to sacrifice all usual worldly comforts and stabilities to keep this access to the romantic divine in its life. And this is where Neptune has a reputation for being chaotic, for being messy, or for getting itself into relationships that involve some level of deception or abuse of power. Because if a Neptunian person has attached themselves to someone that it is convinced is perfect for them, who has that godly spell over their heart, the person who has done the enchanting may say, well, this person would do anything for me, and I'm going to make them do anything for me. You know, they would do anything for me. They would look after me to the very end. And I'm pretty happy to lay back and let that happen. And this is also why Venus-Neptune can so easily become embroiled in relationships with people who are drug addicts or violent alcoholics, or who are abusive or manipulative or gaslighting, or one of those kinds of people who controls them absolutely and demands that they give up their work, career, their friendships, their everything for them. Because that devotion in many ways is not that different from the devotion that someone shows to a god. You know, like if someone chooses to belong to a monastic community or to become a hermit, monk, or a nun, they also have to renounce all their worldly possessions, all of their worldly power, their worldly status, and saying that I am willing to surrender all those things and just serve the Godhead or the quest for enlightenment, because that ultimate goal is so high that everything else does seem trivial in comparison. So it wants a love that is like a flood, that is like a tide, that just lets it get completely carried away. Because then there is a freedom, there is an absolution from always having to be self-conscious, to always having to be in control of oneself. If you've said, I'm no longer in control, my will is an extension of my partner's will, or the extension of the God that I worship, then you are almost regressing to childhood in a way. You no longer have to exhaust yourself thinking about what do I do every day, you know. Instead, someone does it for you. And for some people, that is fucking paradise. How this aspect plays out as a transit can really be very ambiguous. Even though it's a trine and we think of a trine as being harmonious, still some things we would not usually welcome into our life can occur under this transit, and it all depends on the natures of the relationships that we either have in our life or which we are inclined to seek. If we have a partnership that does leave room for the fantastical, that does have a deeper spiritual connection to it, then Venus, Trine, Neptune transits can be very pleasant. They can be these times when we feel like we are able to put our egos, the narcissism of small differences to one side, and instead just focus on those deeper or more spiritual aspects of the relationship. You can focus on the love instead of, you know, having arguments about what bills have been paid or haven't paid, or whose turn it is to change the child's nappy. You can say none of those things matter. The only thing that matters is how deeply and devoted we love one another. The fact that we can feel that blurring of energies where my soul begins to feel like it merges with yours, and we have that wonderful sense of there being this amazing communion between us, where my music is felt on a basic nature to be inseparable to yours. However, it can also be a time of disillusionment, where if our existing partnership is not in any way able to be reconciled with the deeper fantasies or yearnings or expectations of the ways in which we want our relationship to be a bit more magical, to be more special, to be this thing that is touching us on a deep emotional level, rather than just being something that is, you know, helping us feel safe and protecting us from just feeling lonely, then that can be when we get that restless eye where we say, you know, would rather go and chase that mermaid out there that I see cavorting on the high seas than stay where I know that I'm unhappy and unfulfilled, and where I don't think things are likely to change. So I have found that it's not unusual during this transit for, if someone is in a relationship that isn't satisfying them, suddenly someone else comes along as a source of temptation, who seems to be everything that their current partner isn't, who seems to be someone who is If they were sat down and asked to paint or draw or write a song about their perfect partner, suddenly that person comes along and you think, my God, that person is so much more colourful and intriguing and fantastical than the boring one I have so far, who doesn't feel like they would lift a finger for me. Should I stay in this relationship? And this is where Venus in Cancer and Neptune in Pisces start to have a war with one another, because Venus in Cancer would rather choose the thing that is safe, that is secure, to keep the bird it has in hand, rather than the much more magical Technicolor one it might have in the bush. Whereas Neptune says, fuck safety, fuck security. True love is worth dying for. True love is worth having the Tristan and Isolde experience for. And it would much rather have a love that touched it to the very core on both a euphoric and tragic level, rather than something that was mundane and secure, but even and lacking in those emotional highs and lows, those tempest-tossed waves that it wants to just freely submit itself to. The irony is, though, that a lot of the time, if someone does end up saying, okay, I'm going to end this relationship and instead pursue that magical creature that I've seen over there, they do so, and the magical creature who tempted them out of the relationship disappears. And it's almost like that person was sent solely to fulfill a role, solely to prevent them from sitting in stagnant waters. Instead, Neptune was offering them the possibility of purgation and renewal, of reminding them that there is an imaginal spark to life that it is lacking. But just because it's lacking it doesn't mean Neptune is going to make the voyage easy for you. Doesn't mean that, like Odysseus on his endless journey to Ithaca, that he's suddenly going to give you a free ride and take you back to that source that you long for. He's just reminding you that you have that longing to begin with, that there is more to life than just satisfying your animal needs for emotional security and safety, that some things truly are worth sacrificing that safety and stability for. Some things are worth surrendering and putting to one side if we want to welcome more into life than just our ego. But also Neptune is teaching us that there is a certain power and bliss and joy in not being in control all the time, of allowing ourselves to submit to trance and to allow the gods to speak through us, instead of convincing ourselves that we as humans are godly enough. On the other hand, if we experience this transit while we are single, we might find that this is a time where we become more receptive to love entering our lives. You know, during everyday functioning Saturnian consciousness, we may be so busy just supporting ourselves, just working, just keeping all the balls being juggled and all our routines up in the air, that we think, oh, I'm not sure I really have time for a relationship. I'm not sure I'm really willing to compromise or depart from any of the structures that I currently have in place to welcome someone in. Because if you've become used to being independent, if you've become used to doing things on your own, then letting someone else into the private kingdom or empire that you have constructed means a willingness to dissolve and loosen, or just allow to be completely washed away some of the existing boundaries and security and strong definition that you have. You know, if we are too rigid, we can kind of say, okay, well, I've built this perfectly constructed life for myself. Any partner who comes along has to fit completely into that. Whereas when Neptune comes along, that yearning for love and that willingness to be receptive to it in whichever form it announces it means that we allow those critical faculties to be put down, that part of us that expects, you know, someone just to practically fit in with us perfectly, or that is just always looking for these red flags. We relax that and we say, you know what, actually, these people in my life could be magical, they could be special, they could be worth letting go of some of my existing independence and solace and solitude for. I'm not sure these things really satisfy me anymore. I feel that loneliness. I feel that nagging divine homesickness in me. I feel that there is somewhere where I need to have those waters flood me and purge me and baptize me and make me whole again. And if that means loosening the tight grip that I have on my concept of self, that I have on my existing values, then I'm willing to be changed. I'm willing to permit someone to come into my life and potentially change me completely. Because it's true that when we love someone and they inspire those unexpected spiritual longings or deep feelings in us, it can make us have a crisis of conscience and identity, where we no longer know who we are anymore, where we feel like we've loved someone we never thought we would love, or have loved in a way that we never thought that we were possible. And we ask ourselves, well, who am I in the shadow of this love? Do I even have a true I anymore? Because I've let this person in to such a degree that they have now become a part of myself. I am no longer a separate entity, but I am part of a bigger whole, of which this relationship seems like some kind of magical hologram transporting me closer to the source. And to keep that in my life, I am willing to allow much more flexibility and fluidity in terms of how things go, rather than just anally holding on to the rigid forms and structures with which I currently identify myself. However, as pleasant as all that can be, and confusing and bewildering and overwhelming at the same time, this particular aspect of Venus trine Neptune with Venus in Cancer over the last few years has been quite complex, because it's always aligned with an opposition to Pluto as well, who has a very different feeling about this kind of setup. You know, like I said, it's possible for Venus Neptune to be a really romantic, dreamy, delirious, exciting, nostalgic, transporting transit, because it is willing to surrender and let go of so many of its hard boundaries in order to experience true love and closeness and intimacy with someone else. But Pluto, on the other side of the equation, looks at Neptune's willingness to let go of all reason and all control with absolute horror. Because it says, if we surrender our will to this other person, then what if they try and control us? What if they try and manipulate us? What if they try and kill us? What if they try and change us into a form or force us into a way of life that we don't want? And so Pluto, rather than being willing to blindly trust in either an existing partner or a possible new one in the hope that it will pay off, because if it gives wholeheartedly, it may receive wholeheartedly as well, Pluto says, truly allowing yourself to love anyone is dangerous. Truly letting anyone in is dangerous. And if you think that your partner could potentially control you or transform you into something that you don't want to be, that they will potentially remold you to fit their values, you've got to make sure you do the same first. You've got to make sure that you are the one in power, that you are the one on the throne or behind the steering wheel in the relationship. So there can be this real cross purposes between wanting to be totally dependent on your partner and have them be totally dependent on you, so that you can form this private paradise with one another, and yet also this great conflict over what you think the relationship is all about, this great battle of wills as to where the relationship should be heading. So we can imagine a setup where two people are pulling a relationship in different directions. Let's say Venus in Cancer is on one side, very much aligning quite closely with Neptune, saying, well, I want this loving, soft relationship. I want us to get married. I want us to have children. I want us to live together. I want, the White House with the picket fence and the cute rose garden, and, maybe the well with the special nymph lurking inside of it. And then Pluto on the other side says, well, I don't want that at all. That's not what I value. That's not what I care about. And in order to give that to you, I would be surrendering my freedom and self-control. And I'm not sure I really want that, you know. I am Pluto in Aquarius. I think that relationships like that are hackneyed and backwards and anti-progressive and misogynistic and relics of a patriarchal system that we are attempting to move from. I want a relationship that is free, in which there is a true sense of spiritual and platonic solidarity, rather than just something that is allowing us to be governed by our lower instincts. I want something that enables me to commit not just to you, but the greater good of the rest of the human race as well. You know, maybe I don't want to get married and have children. I'm not sure. I feel like that would limit the freedom and the independence of my spirit. I'm also not sure I want to be monogamous and married, because I would like to love you, but I would also leave the door open to maybe love other people as well, because I feel that true love is not limited to just two people, but is universal and is capable of transcending petty human jealousies and possessiveness and embracing more of the human race, both literally and symbolically. And Venus in Cancer is horrified by these crazy notions that it sees as being diseased and unfaithful and an attack on traditional family values. And, you know, Pluto in Aquarius sees Venus in Cancer as being backwards and petty and selfish and small-minded and governed by its lower emotions rather than the enlightened wisdom of higher reason with a capital R. And this is just a hypothetical situation, obviously, but it's just describing that if two people both love one another and want to be with one another, but have values that are pulling them in different directions, then Pluto says it's black or white. Either we do things my way or we do things your way. And then there becomes this tug of war to see who will win, who will be able to reshape that other partner and transform them in their role. Either Venus in Cancer says, well, you've got to forget about all these crazy new age concepts and just settle down and get a good job and marry me like a good husband or wife says. Or Pluto in Aquarius wins and says, you know, you've got to step outside of your comfort zones. If you want to stay with me, then you've got to let go of these ideals and values that you've just inherited blindly from your family and the collective, and be willing to try something new. You might enjoy it. You know, it would be giving not just me more freedom, but you more freedom as well. And Pluto either transforms things or it kills things. And some people may say that put in such a polarity in a relationship situation, they might rather leave and find someone else who is closer to their values. Or they might say in that Neptunian way, I love this person so much that I am willing to sacrifice my own values, my own beliefs, my own opinions, my own ideals about how a relationship can be, so that I can keep this magical person in my life who fulfills me in deeper ways. But I will say that in this battle of wills, when Neptune is on the scene, if Neptune is trying to make someone do things its own way, it tends to be very subtle and deceptive and manipulative about it. It knows the strings that it can pull emotionally to get someone to do that it wants. And sometimes it will do this by playing helpless, by playing the victim, so that the other partner has to submit to its wishes and take care of it because it looks too helpless to take care of itself. Or it may turn the tables and make the other person feel helpless and stupid and weak and insecure, and as though they are obviously stronger and more superior, so that, well, you know, you're crazy, you're silly, you're unreasonable, you don't have a proper grasp on reality. I do, and therefore I should be the ones who calls the shots in this relationship, not you. So what starts out as an intention to obsessively hold on to a possible dream at all costs can become pretty toxic, you know. if the only way that we can keep the paradise that we think we have constructed in our lives is to control people or manipulate them or imprison them into staying in it, then it might not be the best relationship or situation to be in. However, humans are messy and relationships are messy, and any relationship will inevitably involve going through some kind of ego death and being willing to surrender the rigid, fixed forms of who we think we are and what we think our heart is, so that more of the universe can be allowed to pour in through the cracks and the fractures that are forced upon it through those phases of breakdown and regrowth. Anyway, that was a lot there. Don't want to inundate you. If you are having your own weird Neptune, Pluto experiences and romantic crises at the moment that you would like my insights on, feel free to message me at thestarsunraveled@outlook.com. You can follow me on Instagram at astrologyandunderwear, or you can support me on Patreon at www.patreon.com/thestarsunraveled. Anyway, I've just seen a well in the garden, and a sexy looking nymph in it. And if you'll excuse me, I'm about to dive right in.